I've got a couple of questions. They're interrelated. I know that you mentioned earlier that most of the businesses in the country have few employees, or relatively few employees compared to the larger businesses. And one of the main points that you said is you want to have energy reform. You want to start drilling, offshore drilling, going to Alaska. And it's going to be hard for those businesses that have few employees to get out there. So I was wondering if you could comment on that.
Get to Alaska, you mean?
Or offshore, New Orleans.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, the one question for the gentleman in the front was, for small and medium-sized business, how do you get involved in offshore drilling or drilling in Alaska?
So there's like a problem with the middle class.
Yeah.
It's really decreasing.
Yeah. So one of the things is who actually drills the oil, who goes, finds it, and brings it to market. And obviously, a lot of the bigger companies do that, but there's suppliers and vendors and others who work for it. But as importantly, it's not just who goes and gets it, but what does it do to the price of gas and the price of energy overall? Because for a lot of people, I bet you when you go fill up your car every week, you notice, and it affects your weekly budget or your monthly budget. So one issue is there ways for small and medium-sized business to participate in the act of drilling, and they're going to find it. And let's face it, a lot of the big companies do that, but a lot of their contractors, vendors, people who provide the service are smaller and medium-sized businesses. Then, as importantly, if we're successful in getting more energy to market, it'll bring down the price. So the middle class and people who are struggling will have a lighter load when it comes to paying for their gas, paying for their home heat, their electricity, and the like.
Right. And the actual people doing the drilling are actual Americans.
Yeah, working. Yeah, they're employees. Yeah. And I should tell you my background quick. Look, I grew up in a meatpacking town. So it's South St. Paul, Minnesota. It's right outside of the Twin Cities. But back in the day, it was the home of the world's largest meatpacking plants. 5, 6, 7-story meatpacking plants surrounded by the world's largest stockyards. They used to process millions of animals through there a year. And my dad, for much of his life, was a truck driver, a Teamster truck driver. My mom was a homemaker. She died when I was young of ovarian cancer. My dad lost his job not too long after that. None of my brothers and sisters were able to go to college and complete. And when my mom was dying, not too many days before she passed on, she called my brothers and sisters into her hospital room, and said, look, I want you to look me in the eye and promise me that you'll do everything you can to get him through school and get him to college. And so I was the first in my family to go to college. And when you're young and your mom passes on and your dad's unemployed, you get to make some decisions in life about what you believe and what's real, and you learn some lessons along the way. I bet some of you in this room have had some of those chapters of challenge in your life too. And so for me, it was a time to lean into my faith. It was my time to appreciate a loving family and what it means to have brothers and sisters who come along and help, or others that love you and want to help. The importance of a job. A phone rang one morning, and the guy who ran the produce department in the grocery store said, I heard about your family's plight. Come on down here on Saturday morning at 6 a.m. and you got a job. So I worked in the produce department of the grocery store for the next 7 years through high school, college, and even part of law school. So I learned the value of a job and what it means to have a little extra money, or at least any money, and what that means to stabilize and be able to take care of yourself, and what that means. And then the value of education. As I said before, I was the first one in my family to go to college. So look, we all get these challenges in life. For some, they come at different times. Sometimes it's money, sometimes it's health, sometimes it's other things. And it's not easy, but I've been able to live the American dream. So for me, it's not about numbers, it's not about a spreadsheet. It's about, this is the greatest country the world's ever known. And the main way that people are going to be successful is if they have opportunity. The main way they're going to have opportunity is if we have the best schools possible, they get the best education and skills possible, but also we got to have an economy where people have access to jobs. And the jobs are not growing to any meaningful degree in this country right now. And with all due respect to President Obama, he had his chance. Look, he said pass that stimulus bill or the unemployment could go all the way up to 8%. Well, they passed it and it went up to 10%. He said when he first became president, he cut the budget deficit in half in his first term. He's tripled it. The economy is not going in the right direction. Standard & Poor's downgraded the credit rating of the United States last week. Now, the economy worldwide is starting to tank, not just because of that, but because You can't live beyond your means. I don't know if you know this, but 40 cents of every dollar that the federal government spends is debt. They don't have it. And could you imagine if 40 cents of every dollar you spent was debt or deficit? And you might be able to do it for a little while, but you know what happens eventually. You know, it's a Ponzi scheme. It's a pyramid scheme. It's going to come crashing down, and we got to fix it. Yeah?
With all the environmental destruction and the weather the way it is, I look around the United States and I see a lot of people suffering because tornadoes and floods destruct all these towns and stuff. Do we have a plan in place as it gets bigger and badder to help these people more, like a little bit better? I mean, help build construction jobs in those areas. And I still see people suffering from New Orleans, yet there's so many natural disasters still going on in different areas. What are our plans to help those people and get them back there?
Sure. Question in the front, it's a really good question. I know Iowa's experienced this a lot recently, but natural disasters and what do we do to help communities recover? How do we get better help and faster help to those communities? And I know in Iowa and Minnesota there's a strong tradition of people caring, not just in government, but you know, the Red Cross and Salvation Army and various groups that come in and try to help with the initial recovery and rebuilding efforts. Look, I was governor for 8 years. We saw our share of tornadoes, blizzards, floods, other natural disasters. Of course, the bridge collapsing in Minneapolis. And of course, in those moments, you see a number of things. One of them you see is people really care about each other, and people come forward initially and help each other in powerful and important ways. So there's a goodness in Iowans and Minnesota that shines through in those moments. But then you need to help people rebuild. And FEMA post-Katrina didn't do a very good job. FEMA wasn't ready, was ill-managed, ill-prepared for many years prior to that, and the weaknesses of that system shone through in Katrina. But it's gotten better. It's still not perfect, there's still a ways to go. But in my experience as governor of Minnesota, they were much quicker, much better than they were during Katrina. So there's been some improvement. We also need to make sure that to the fullest extent possible, people have insurance. You know, you can't always see when these things are coming, but for example, there's a lot of areas that flood regularly in Minnesota. They flood often. You know, you can predict over the years, and you go into those areas and say to people, "Did you have flood insurance?" Nope. How come? Well, I don't know. And you don't have to wait. You know, oftentimes if the spring is coming and the water's predicted to be high, you can buy insurance pretty late. You know, in other words, you can't wait till after the flood, but you know, in the weeks leading up to a likely flooded period of time, you can still get it. So we need to do a better job promoting and encouraging insurance as well. Yes?
What are your plans for overseas with all our military and different parts, like not just Iraq, but with some like rewards going on? Are you planning on helping those people out more, or getting them out, our troops, and focusing on more building the United States, or sending people overseas to help What are your plans on that?
Good question. Well, as it relates to the military and supporting the men and women in our military, we should just stop and reflect. We just lost 31 of our best members of the military over the last few days in Afghanistan. These are special operators. They're representative of the kind of commitment and sacrifice and patriotism and service. I'm sure we have some veterans in the room here. But we wouldn't have the country we have without the brave men and women who raise their hand and step forward and are willing to serve in our United States military. At every turn, we should be thankful and grateful for them in both words and deeds. So when I was governor, we put on the #1 list military, National Guard, veterans, their family support programs, and made that the #1 priority for our budget, for our support, again, in words and deeds. And that's what I'll do as president. They give us their all, we need to give them our all, to the fullest extent possible. And then in terms of the wars and our overseas commitment, you know, we're almost out of Iraq. We got the last contingent group there. There's some discussion about a small group remaining in Iraq, but the plan is to have them out or mostly out by the end of this calendar year. But there's some uncertainty and lack of capacity that the Iraq government has as it relates to air cover, intelligence, and some other things. So I would be in favor of leaving for a little while longer a small group in Iraq to make sure that that transition is as smooth as possible, because we put a lot of blood and treasure and sacrifice into Iraq, and if we don't leave a group there and it all goes backwards quickly, I think that would dishonor the hard work that we've done there. As to Afghanistan, we're going to draw down in Afghanistan. It's just a question over what period of time. President Obama's got a plan on the table. I would have followed General Petraeus' advice and done it a little differently, but we are going to be drawing down in Iraq. It's just there's a debate about how fast, how much, and under what conditions. Yeah, well, if you're interested, I gave a huge speech on the Middle East at the Council on Foreign Relations in New York. It's at Pawlenty.com. It goes through the whole Middle East, all the countries. Each country's different, but for example, we have some really good friends in the Middle East that share our values, and Israel's one of them. You know, we should stand with Israel. As to a country like Syria, Syria right now is in the news. You've got their leader, Bashar al-Assad, killing his own people. President Bush said, we're not going to honor that country because they're, of all the bad things that they do by putting diplomatic relations. We're not going to send an ambassador there. We're not going to cooperate fully with Syria. President Obama gets into office, sends an ambassador there, establishes diplomatic relations, believes that Bashar al-Assad is a reformer. To this day, won't tell him he has to go. And he's killing people in the streets. Now, it is not as simple as just saying we're going to bring everybody home. We're worried about Iran getting a nuclear weapon. If Iran gets a nuclear weapon, we won't be sitting here talking about, health care and schools. We're going to have a very different world on our hands. Pakistan already has nuclear weapons. So we need to make sure that America protects its security interests, not just here, but around the world, because things that happen over there can very dramatically affect us in a big hurry. And this isn't the world anymore where you have 6 months or 6 years notice that something's coming. This stuff can happen in minutes. And so we need to maintain our defense, and we need to maintain our security interests strongly and clearly here, and as need be across the world as well. Yes, sir.
Sunday in the Sunday Register, and I don't know if you saw it, but the banking industry is now getting the implications of the Dodd-Frank bill. And an Iowa banker said, we've had to meet 26 federal requirements to make a loan. Now it's going to be 20 more because of the Dodd-Frank bill. Would you be willing to put a moratorium on federal regulators for a time being until for the non-safety regulations, and then study them and let the industry have input in terms of what should be appropriate regulations? And
yes,
that should open up industry.
For the rest of in the audience who may not follow this, there's a bill called the Dodd-Frank bill after the economic collapse of 2008, all this bad behavior in the banking industry, housing industry. You remember all these loans that were getting made that shouldn't have been made, all the pressure and politicization of the housing finance industry. So in response to that, the Congress passed a reform bill called Dodd-Frank. But it's put a lot of burdens on small and community banks in particular, and they're saying there's so much regulation, so many requirements now that it's increasing their costs, making it difficult for them to make loans, or the regulations are so tight it's discouraging them from making loans. And once that happens, small businesses can't start, can't get loans, can't grow, and it slows down the economy. So I would favor, sir, stopping Dodd-Frank and reevaluating it and trying to get it fixed or reformed. More broadly, though, I would say this. On regulations, every regulation should be sunset so that they don't go on forever. They should only go for 3 or 5 years and have to come up for renewal. And then 2, every major regulation should have to go back to Congress for an up or down vote. The way it works now is Congress passes a law. Oftentimes it's general. It goes out to the bureaucracy. The bureaucracy, cranks out all the details, and then the details become very important. But unfortunately, real people can't convince these bureaucrats to change their mind. They're unelected, they don't care, they stiff-arm people, but the real impacts of people who are really impacted by this can't really affect the bureaucracy. So let's make it come back to the Congress for an up or down vote, so our elected representatives have to stand behind the regulations or not, and let real people have one more chance at their member of Congress before the regulations go into final effect. One last thing on the housing finance crisis. There's a group called the Fannie and Freddie, which is a federally guaranteed entity. Now they're the ones, one of the biggest culprits in the housing crisis was Fannie and Freddie. Congress manipulated them, and a lot of that was what was behind the crisis of 2008. And guess who Dodd-Frank gave a complete pass to? Fannie and Freddie. They didn't get touched. They're the ones that should have been right in the front line of reform, and they got a complete free pass. Sir?
You know, cost of fuel affects everything, groceries, etc. I used to work on a receiving dock, and this was during the last gas crisis. I had a bill for $35 for the material that I got, and a $50 fuel charge tax. The thing is, with the EPA as strong as it is, it's affecting the lower income and the elderly with all the EPA regulations. And with that going on, it's hard for people to make ends meet. So the EPA needs to be looked at, even in a solar deal. Boone Pickens was going to build a big windmill farm, and because of some animal or whatever and all the legal stuff he had to go through, said to heck with it, I'm not doing it. That was in Texas. The thing I want to know is, if you're president, are you going to put some control on the EPA?
The EPA is out of control. This is the Environmental Protection Agency, and as businesses complain about taxes, they're concerned about that for good reason, they're concerned about regulation. One of the things that comes up most frequently is the out of control EPA. First of all, I would fire the woman who runs it. I think she is really misguided and misdirecting the EPA. Two is we need to find a way for the EPA to say yes to job growth and economic development, not no to everything and slow it down. Three is they need to decide faster. You know, a lot of businesses say, tell me yes, tell me no, but tell me quickly. Four, I would say a lot of what they do, or some of what they do, can be pushed back to the states because every state has their own version of EPA. We don't need to have duplication in that regard. And we got to make sure that we have the right balance between protecting the environment but growing jobs. And right now we need to grow jobs. Yes?
One of the things that Iowa struggled with at the end of their session was early education for children and cutting the budget. What are some of your plans from starting as young as early childhood development all the way up through the educational systems?
Yeah. Well, as it relates to early childhood and education broadly, it is mostly not a federal issue. I think this should be decided at the state and local school district and parent level. But here's what I know about education. I've been heavily involved in it. Number one, the most important determining factor of how a child's going to do in school is their parents. So any discussion about education should start with what can we do to encourage engaged and responsible parenting. And that's really important. You can't legislate it, but we can encourage it. And that's number one. Number two, the second most important determining factor of how a child's going to do in school is the quality and effectiveness and preparedness of their teachers. And our teachers are good people. They work hard, but they work in a very outdated system. We need to do a much better job getting higher quality people into the colleges of education who want to become teachers, making sure they actually learn something when they're there before we let them out, have minimum requirements about what they learn before we let them go teach. And once they are teaching them, we have rigorous oversight to make sure that if they're not good teachers, we either get them better trained or we get them out. And that's not how it works now. We need to have a big overhaul of the teaching profession in the country, and that's happening, but it's happening too slowly. And then lastly, I think we've got to open up the system so we don't just have a government-run, top-down, one-size-fits-all education system. I don't know about you, but if you have a smartphone or an iPad, in the world we live in now, people get what they want, wherever they want it, whatever time they want it, in whatever form they want it. The government doesn't come around or shouldn't come around and say, here's your one choice, it's government run, if you don't like it, sit down and shut up. That ain't the way the world works anymore. And so if I want to send my kids to the government schools, or you do, sir, that's one choice. If you want to send your kids to the neighboring government school, you should be able to do that through open enrollment. If you want to send your kids to a charter school, you should be able to do that. If you want to send your kids to a private school, you should be able to do that. If you want to homeschool your kids because you want to put the time and energy and attention into that and they have great results, terrific. If you want to have your kids go to online learning or have that be part of their educational experience, wonderful. But we need to open up this thing so it is not a one-size-fits-all government-run monopoly. That isn't the way the world works anymore. People have different interests, aptitudes, learning speeds, experiences, pace, and so we need to customize or at least semi-customize the learning experience. And lastly, if you want to see an interesting thing about education, go watch Waiting for Superman. It's a movie about the plight of our education system in America. And Iowa and Minnesota do a little better, but the bottom line is we got about a third of our students in the country not graduating high school. And of course that presents all sort of challenges later on if you don't graduate from high school. There's this little Hispanic girl in the movie, her name's Daisy, I think. She and her mom are working really hard to try to do what they can to get out of their school, which isn't very good, to a charter school, which they believe is better, and is in fact better. But there's only a certain number of slots the government will allow each year for kids to leave to go to a better school. And your ability to get one of those slots depends on whether a ping pong ball with your number rolls down a chute at the lottery at the end of the year for next year. So your ability to get you or your kids to a good school should not depend on whether your number rolls out of a lottery chute at the end of the year. That's really pathetic. You should have the ability, and if the government's going to spend money on schools, money should go to you, and you can decide what you want to do in terms of your best thing for you and your kids. You shouldn't have some bureaucrat or some bureaucracy tell you you're condemned to one option or condemned to one choice if it's not very good. You should have other options and other choices that's best for you and your family. I'll just close on that because I know we're out of time, but the issue that you just raised, or I'm just trying to touch on, is really reflective of the whole thing. You know why this country is a great country? We're not the biggest country in the world. We only have 300+ million people. There's places that are 5 times bigger than us. We're not the greatest country in the world because we're the cheapest. We got to be more competitive, but we're not the cheapest. We're the greatest country in the world because we're the freest. And when people are free, they can dream as they see fit, they can invent, they can worship as they see fit, they can speak as they see fit, they can do or not do as they see fit. And we take that for granted here sometimes, more than we should, but it's different in other countries and other cultures across the world and throughout time. And sometimes you think, well, our freedom's only going to be taken away by some outside force. Somebody's going to take it away, perhaps. And we should be vigilant about that. But more often, the way it gets taken away is in ways you don't even notice. The government comes in and says, you know, we're going to take over one more piece of what was your family decision-making. Or we're going to force you just to one school option. Or they're going to come in and say, you know, we're going to take over one more chunk of the private economy. We're going to regulate it more. We're going to tax it more. We're going to limit it more. And when government does that, they not only grow their budgets, they not only run the numbers through the roof, but they begin to weigh down and discourage the American spirit. And there's a lot of discouragement in the country right now. I mean, this gentleman's frustrated about the banks, this gentleman's frustrated about the EPA, you're frustrated about the gasoline prices, and if we had time to go around the room, you know, one of the big things in the country right now is people feeling discouraged. That's not the America I grew up in. It's not the America you grew up in. It's not the America we want. This is a hopeful, optimistic, free, can-do country, but it's not based on the bureaucracy. It's not based on the government. It's based on the people. The strength and brilliance of this country is in us. People who say, I can do it better, I can do it faster, I can do it cheaper, I'll work harder, I've got a different idea, we can try it a different way. And when the government limits that and discourages it, we've got a whole different country on our hands, and that's what's going on. So I hope that you'll help us fight back and get this thing back on track. And if you haven't been involved, you know, too much or directly in politics in the past, it's not too late. In fact, it's really important that you do. We'll get you a ride to Ames. You just got to get on the bus. We'll get you back. We'll take care of you. Have a good time. Listen to some music. Have some barbecue. Have a blizzard. And that's this Saturday. So if you're interested, sign up. Thanks for listening. I appreciate it very much.
Did you do it too? Oh my God.